Hello, and welcome to Justin's Corner, the show where I, Justin, sit in a corner and talk about a movie. So, today, the movie that I'm going to be discussing is Higher Learning. Higher Learning is a 1995 film written and directed by John Singleton, a black director known for some other films such as Boys in the Hood, Poetic Justice, and Too Fast, Too Furious, which I actually didn't know before researching that he directed Too Fast, Too Furious. But the movie stars Omar Epps, Michael Rappaport, Ice Cube, Tyra Banks, Christy Swanson, and Lawrence Fishburne, just to name a few. So, a short summary of the plot. So, the movie follows four college students, Malik, Kristen, Remy, and Deja, at fictional Columbus University in California. Malik is a track athlete on scholarship at the university. Kristen is characterized as a sort of naive freshman from nearby Orange County. Remy is a social outcast from Idaho originally, and Deja is an older student athlete, also on the track team, who ends up befriending Malik. So Malik, pretty much throughout the whole movie, is struggling with his relationship between athletics and academics. He finds help and friendship in Deja, and he also ends up forming a relationship with Professor Phipps, Lawrence Fishburne's character, who I will get into more a little bit later. So Kristen becomes a victim of sexual assault at a frat party pretty early on in the movie. She ends up confiding in Taryn, a junior, who convinces her to join a student support group for women. Remy, throughout the film, sort of becomes more and more isolated socially from his peers, and he ends up joining a white supremacist group. So, some themes of the movie, the big ones obviously are, the intersectionality of race, gender, and sexuality on college campuses. There are also some darker themes in the movie, such as racism, sexual assault, and violence. So, a few of the specific themes that I wanted to talk about. Later in the movie, Remy ends up committing a mass shooting on the school during a peace event organized by Kristen. And one of the people that's murdered, actually the only person that's named that's murdered, is Deja, the friend and girlfriend of Malik, the main character. And to me, the murder of Deja was highly representative of the way that women, specifically women of color, are often caught in the crossfire of violence, which is perpetuated by men. And this can often be seen in domestic violence, domestic assault, and often just murder in general. Women are often the victims of many violent situations perpetuated by men. I felt as if Deja was a relatively non-confrontational and non-conflictual character throughout the film, and then she ends up being the one who gets murdered during the shooting. And I definitely felt that to be sort of metaphorical in a sense. Like I said, that women are often the victims of this societal or cultural or racial or just masculine violence perpetuated by men. Another large theme in the movie, a slightly more heavy-handed one, is the theme of police brutality. There are many instances in the movie in which the campus police, acted with more aggression towards black students than with white students. And the big one specifically comes after Remy has committed the shooting. He's being pursued by the police, and the police have already apprehended Malik, and obviously they very violently apprehended him. And with Remy, they're, being a lot more docile, being a lot more understanding. And even at the moment that he ends up committing suicide, they seem much more affected by that than, say they would have if a black student had died. And, there were many instances, specifically with Ice Cube's character, Fudge, and actually Busta Rhymes' character, which I didn't realize that it was Busta Rhymes immediately while watching until I started researching a little bit more. But specifically with their characters, they have multiple run-ins with the police in which the police treat them differently than they do the white students. And that's a little bit more heavy-handed, an instance of racism in the film, definitely. I think that, excuse me, a large theme that sort of goes under the radar is the perpetuation of racist institutions in America that have their foundations laid deep within the roots of the American government, of higher education, of American culture as a whole. And I think that a big thing that you see this in is just the school being named after Christopher Columbus. Obviously, Malik mentions it at one point that, Christopher Columbus was no more than a genocidal colonizer, essentially. And the fact that, many schools across the country, many buildings, highways, statues, whatever, you name it, are in memoriam to or named after, many of these racist, terrible people. And the shot that stood out to me specifically in the film that kind of depicted this was after the shooting, when Malik has taken Deja after she's been shot, and he lays her underneath the statue, and there's a bird's eye view shot over the shoulder of Christopher Columbus looking down upon Malik and Deja as she is, laying on the ground bleeding out from a gunshot wound as a result of a hate crime. I felt that to be generally very representative of this theme in the movie. Also, the constant, near constant use of the American flag sort of gave me the idea that the director, John Singleton, was using this film as a microcosm for essentially the entire United States in our institutional treatment of black people and minorities in general, because there are certainly many depictions of minorities in this movie. The character that I think I found the most intriguing was probably Professor Phipps. Possibly not for the reasons that you might assume. I didn't really... I understood just watching the film from a critical perspective that Professor Phipps was meant to be a sort of positive role model for Malik throughout the movie, but I didn't really see it that way because at one point Malik accuses Professor Phipps of being an Uncle Tom, giving in to the white establishment in America and in American education. And Professor Phipps never really denies this necessarily. I feel as if Professor Phipps represented sort of the peaceful side of the civil rights movement. For instance, like Martin Luther King preaching, acceptance, nonviolence, petitioning, that kind of thing. Whereas I felt like a character like Fudge was more representative of the like militant Afrocentric side of the civil rights movement, like ergo Malcolm X. So I thought there was an interesting dichotomy between the two characters there, and that they were both sort of trying to influence Malik in his ideals and the way that he thought about, institutional racism in America. But Professor Phipps never, in my opinion, really provides Malik with any valuable or constructive advice. The only thing that he really ever says to him that's generally constructive is run faster, which I found to be not necessarily problematic, but didn't necessarily agree with, because, if you're looking at running as a metaphor for, the black experience in America, there are many things that cannot be outrun, no matter how fast you are, no matter how fast Malik is, he cannot outrun the way that many people see him. And I think that that's perpetuated in the murder of Deja, that, they were both track athletes, and hypothetically speaking, no matter how fast either of them could run, they could not outrun the racism that, still abides in America to this day. And the form of racism that looks at them and, other black people as lesser because of the color of their skin. And at the end of the film, after the shooting, Malik is sort of stewing on the future of his education. He's not quite sure whether he wants to continue with it or not because of the things that he's seen and the things that he's experienced, which is fair. But you would think that, a positive role model would, promote finishing your education, in that instance, not letting these outside factors affect what you want to do with your life, specifically as a young black man who was, a victim of a hate crime, because that is, in essence, what these white supremacists would want, is for a student like Malik who witnessed and was victimized by this act of violence to not continue with their education or continue whatever it was that they were doing, which incited the violence in the first place. But Professor Phipps basically says that he trusts Malik's judgment, which I guess I kind of understand, but this obviously leaves Malik still in a kind of like purgatory, in essence, of his educational journey, because the movie ends with him just running off into the distance and with really no context of where his education is going to go from there. So it's sort of a cliffhanger in a sense, in that you don't really know what Malik's going to do. But as I said, you would think Professor Phipps, supposedly being a positive role model, would want to promote, Malik finishing his education, in honor of Deja, because Deja, was a large factor in his success up to that point. So, yeah, I thought that the end of the movie was sort of confusing just from the perspective of Malik, and it also ends with Professor Phipps exiting underneath an American flag, and there's a title that comes across the screen which says "Unlearn." And there's obviously some debate about, the meaning of that word, what it means in reference to the movie. In my eyes, I sort of took that as unlearn, in terms of what Professor Phipps, I think, would translate that as is, it seems as if he's wanting Malik to unlearn the black experience, because he goes throughout the whole movie, sort of telling Malik that, his experiences, or his experience in higher education is going to be more difficult because he is a black man, because of the things that he's been through. And it seems as if Professor Phipps has unlearned that in a sense, because he has this kind of, because of his nonviolent approach, I guess, to combating institutional racism. He doesn't seem very set on combating it whatsoever. And that doesn't seem very constructive to me, from, the standpoint of bettering the system for those that come after you and, the next generation. So I just kind of thought that Professor Phipps' character was sort of oddly written. I don't really think we got enough background on him to really understand where he was coming from in his mentorship of Malik. So I felt that it came off sort of apologetic, just for blackness in general and the black experience. Whereas contrasted with a character like Fudge, it doesn't seem to be as effective or applicable in essence. So that's really all that I had as far as my notes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.